Welcome. Today I have with me Jon Gold, who is he's the guy who created the term 9/11 truther. Can you tell us the history about where that term came from and
A long time ago in 2004, Howard Stern mentioned a conspiracy movie on his show. I think it was In Plain Sight. And because of that, people like us swarmed to his bulletin board in order to post 9/11 related information. And one of my friends, he went by the name of Some Big Guy. He also worked with 9/11 Blogger for a long time. He came to me one day and he's like, "Man, they're just calling me name after name, and this just takes so much out of me." And I'm like, "Look, man, you're a 9/11 truther. You're doing the right thing." And in my mind, I live in Pennsylvania, so Quakers are big in Pennsylvania. So I just took the ER and added it to 9/11 Truth, and that's where 9/11 Truther came from. The person who coined the phrase 9/11 Truth was Nick Levis. So, and when I created the phrase, and because I created the phrase, I get to define its meaning. And I defined it as someone who fights alongside the 9/11 family members seeking truth, accountability, and justice, someone who fights alongside the sick and dying 9/11 first responders who need health care, and someone that's trying to put an end to the post 9/11 world by using the truth, something we have been denied by our government. And that's essentially what a 9/11 truther was. But the media made it the equivalent of a baby killer or a dog torturer or
Holocaust denier?
a Holocaust denier, conspiracy theorist,
Yes.
anti-Semite. It falls into that category now, and I apologize that they did that. I now refer to myself as an advocate for 9/11 justice. But I named my first book 9/11 Truther, and I thought the controversy behind the word might make it sell a little bit better, and that didn't work. But my first book is called 9/11 Truther, The Fight for Peace, Justice, and Accountability. So that's where the phrase came from.
Now, there's a documentary that you put out. I mean, that a lot of us are familiar with Plain Sight back in the day, and how I remember listening to radio back in early on when I got into this, and they were also having these no plane theorists on. They said these were 9/11 conspiracy theorists, and this is what they believe. And it was always this ridiculous theories that they would bring on the air, and they would kind of just bash these people and be like, "Don't listen to these retards. These people don't know what they're talking about." And I found that was very different from the information that I was finding through my own research online and the internet. So I always questioned this sort of mainstream narrative that's been put forth.
Well, they never gave us a chance. They never gave us a chance. The very first hit piece was documented by Paul Lushmar, or written by Paul Lushmar for The Independent. He wrote a hit piece on September 23rd, 2001, entitled America at War, Conspiracy Enthusiasts. Some blame Jews, others Bush. Everyone has a theory on the net. And that's how they treated it. They didn't treat it as individuals seeking truth, accountability, and justice for the mass murder of 2,978 plus people, doing the right thing. That's an absolute good. When you're
Right.
being lied to about the mass murder of 2,978 plus people,
Well, the
trying
Bush
to find the truth is the right thing to do. And they never approached us that way. They always came at us to bury us. to you know,
Yeah, it was always
delegitimize it.
and always an assassination attempt, and it was never the right arguments. It was always like a straw man version of the arguments that I see them present. And in fact, in counter to that exact position, which Press for Truth showed with the four Jersey wives who were calling the Bush administration, demanding an investigation. It took Bush administration 444 days before they actually started the 9/11 Commission. And they were actually pressuring, Tom Daschle's office and others, don't investigate this, don't look into this. And then, then those offices got sent anthrax attacks, which the anthrax came from, a U.S. bioweapons lab. It was proven.
Fort Detrick.
Yeah.
It came from Fort Detrick. And John Judge, who was the co-founder for 9/11 Citizens Watch, was a big advocate for including the anthrax attacks as part of the investigation from the 9/11 Commission. Yeah. And they never did that, because it came one right after the other. And what happened was, for the investigators of 9/11, they were being pulled off to investigate the anthrax attacks. And as Patty Casaza, 9/11 family member Patty Casaza, explained in 9/11 Press for Truth, when you're investigating something, you need continuity. You need the same people working on this and not mixing up and shuffling up people around. So that's what they did with regards to the anthrax attacks. And
that's also what they did during the with Able Danger terrorist tracking program and other terrorist tracking intelligence networks in the U.S. that had information on these hijackers and were tracking, knew about them getting visas and coming to the country, knew about them studying at flight schools and trying to train on how to fly commercial airlines. They knew about all that intelligence, but they purposely they reassigned people. And John O'Neill, right, the head of the FBI's expert on Osama bin Laden, who was hired to study all these terrorist networks after the '93 World Trade Center bombing, was just was moved off the case as soon as he started getting close and learning about stuff. And
well, he complained about what History Commons referred to as Saudi obstructionism. He was trying to investigate the Saudis and their role into the 9/11 attacks, and was being blocked and thwarted. And FBI agent Robert Wright got on a stage and talked about what happened, and he cried on a stage. Do you ever see that clip of Robert Wright talking about how he was blocked from working on Vulgar Betrayal, which was the FBI's investigation into Saudi Arabia, and their finances with terrorism?
Would we be able to find that on your YouTube channel?
What are we looking for?
I'm going to bring up your YouTube channel now, so that
okay.
people can see it, because you have a 685 videos. Criminally undersubscribed. We're going to subscribe to you here. Hopefully, try to boost that number a little bit higher. But this is a treasure trove archive. Tell people how much money and how much time you've spent archiving all the footage that they've basically erased from the record. All the footage.
The only thing I really spent money on, there was a time I was doing what I called C-SPAN creations. I was going through the C-SPAN library and looking for any and all information having to do with the cover-up of 9/11. And I would buy those clips from C-SPAN and then take the clips and put them together and make a little movie about each topic. I covered praise for the 9/11 report. I covered the Israeli art students. I covered the Visa Express program. A lot of things using C-SPAN footage. So that's the footage I paid for. As far as the videos go, that was a combination of my activism, getting out on the street, filming different actions. It was me taking information from historycommons.org in order to make informational videos about specific topics. It was me. In the beginning, I didn't know how to take a video from the internet and put it on my channel. I had to, you wanted to talk about Tucker Carlson and so forth. Back when Tucker Carlson had Stephen Jones on his TV show, I had to sit there and film it with my camcorder. I had to film my TV in order to put that footage online. So that was another thing. I grabbed as much news footage as I could, having to do with the cover-up of 9/11. And I did my very best to put forward the best information possible. I also made a series called What's Being Covered Up, and it had a 9/11 family member talking about the cover-ups of 9/11. There were 10 different films made, and I did that years ago.
And you helped with Press for Truth, right?
Well, what I did was I gave them the money to finish it. In September, I think, 2005, I contacted Kyle Hentz, who is the co-founder, along with John Judge of 9/11 Citizens Watch, and they were working on a film based on the complete 9/11 timeline created by Paul Thompson and based on the Jersey Girls. And I thought, my God, this is the story that needs to be told. This is the one that people need to see, not the conspiracy theory, documentaries about buildings or missiles or whatever. This is the story that people needed to see. And I also thought that it would be something that would be impossible for the media to ignore. Much to my surprise, 9/11 Press for Truth was released on September 5th, 2006. Not one media outlet in this country covered the release of that documentary. The Jersey Girls were media darlings before the 9/11 Commission, during the 9/11 Commission. They won Miss Magazine's Women of the Year award. They were almost celebrities. And they completely ignored a documentary that told their story. And that was just amazing to me. It almost seemed like there was a decision made somewhere that the media apparatus in the United States will not cover this documentary. As a matter of fact, what they did cover at the time, Ann Coulter wrote in a book of hers some insults against the Jersey Girls or the September 11th advocates.
Right.
And that's who they talked to. They focused more on Ann Coulter's insults of the Jersey Girls than the documentary that told their story. That was just amazing to me. In fact, it still has yet to be covered by any news in this country. It may have received one mention on a Salon piece or something. I don't know, Ray Novoselsky and John Duffy. Ray Novoselsky was the director of 9/11 Press for Truth. John Duffy was a producer, I believe, and they interviewed Richard Clark, who was the counterterrorism czar at the time, about the CIA and their role in 9/11. And when they did that, they had to almost include 9/11 Press for Truth as their description of Ray and John, the director of 9/11 Press for Truth. That was the only mention it ever got. But a PBS station in Colorado called KDBI were willing to show 9/11 Press for Truth, and they got so much praise. It was unbelievable to me. It made me feel so good that it got the praise that it did. I know that if it was shown nationally during prime time, if it was shown nationally during prime time back in 2006 or 2007, I think people would have been in the streets over this issue. I really do.
Absolutely, and I think they purposely tried to stop that, or did, moved against it, because the only thing that I saw in the media during that time was like the no plane theories and these other weird theories that they would
Well,
bat.
Loose Change. Loose Change is the documentary the media decided to focus on as representative of the 9/11 truth movement. Like that was the film that represented our arguments. And that simply wasn't the case. You know,
Especially not Loose Change First Edition. They fixed a couple things, and they tried. They tried several times to fix a couple things they got
well,
wrong.
it, if you
But
notice, most of the hit pieces that have been written over the years have focused on the two main arguments of Loose Change: controlled demolition and a plane not hitting the Pentagon. And every hit piece is focused on those two theories for the most part, the formula that the media has used in order to discredit us. They don't talk about Philip Zelikow, who was the executive director of the 9/11 Commission, a man I believe needs to be arrested for the crimes that he committed during his time at the 9/11 Commission. Honestly, I believe that.
yeah, it's
They
interesting.
won't focus on the ridiculousness or the corruption or compromised 9/11 Commission. They won't focus on the multitude of press releases that have been released by the Jersey Girls or the September 11th advocates over the years. They've released several, like 20 to 30, 40 press releases, each calling into question different aspects of 9/11, and the media simply would not cover it. The big one was in February of 2008 when Phil Sheenan came out with his book called The Commission. There was a story in there that talked about Karl Rove contacting Philip Zelikow, and Philip Zelikow telling his secretary not to document those calls, or something to that effect. And that caused the Jersey Girls to call for an entirely new investigation. And the only news outlet in the country that covered it was Raw Story. I don't know if you've ever heard of Raw Story.
Are they on
They
YouTube?
were no, they were a news website. Oh, there you go. That's their YouTube channel. But if you go look at their site now, they have since taken down that story. So you need to go to archive.org in order to see it.
And they got Alex Jones right up here again. Let's talk a bit about this new Tucker Carlson. You posted a video I want to play real quick for the audience,
Go
um,
ahead.
of Tucker Carlson and the things that he was saying back then about 9/11 truth. Um, I wish I could find that video right now. It's
Just
on your
just
page.
go to search. Uh,
Oh, there's a good one for the questions for Philip Zelikow. Yeah, it's super interesting that people didn't focus more on just the need for a real investigation and the fact that
Well, that's the thing. That's my thing. The 9/11 Commission's report was sold to the world as the definitive account of 9/11. Okay? And if you could show that it was absolutely corrupt and compromised, and if you can show that some of the things that they wrote were absolute lies, then you completely open up the whole story of 9/11 to the need for a new investigation.
right.
And
Well, the thing is, the government investigating itself is just a
well,
complete disaster.
that's not what the families wanted. They wanted actual experts to be on the commission. They wanted a family member to be a commissioner. They wanted Eleanor Hill, who was the staff director for the Joint Congressional Inquiry, to be on the 9/11 Commission. That never happened. And I wrote yesterday something about why it's important, or some of the reasons it's important to discredit the 9/11 Commission. And here's what I wrote. I said the politicians and media don't suggest having, quote, controlled demolition of the buildings like commissions, end quote. The news doesn't get information about 9/11 from the, quote, controlled demolitions of the buildings report, end quote, when writing news articles that requires information about 9/11. They point to the 9/11 Commission for, quote, 9/11 type commissions to investigate different events. The news gets its information about 9/11 from the 9/11 report when they need information for an article that requires information about 9/11. The Saudis constantly point to the 9/11 report as an exoneration in the lawsuit brought on by the 9/11 families. Schools use information from the 9/11 report to teach kids about 9/11. Not much about 9/11 itself, mostly about the day from what I've heard from the students I've spoken to. So why isn't it as important as I think it is to point out that the 9/11 Commission and their report were completely compromised and corrupt more than the controlled demolitions of the buildings? These are just some of the reasons, but hopefully you see how significant it is. So that's...
Yeah, I'm come from a construction background, and so the controlled demolitions thing was a good thing for me because it made sense to me and it was undeniable, and I figured a point of explaining to other people and showing them what was going on. But I didn't realize the conditions of human brainwashing and denial, that no matter what evidence you show some people, they just cannot accept.
Well, actually, I found, very early on in the early days of the 9/11 Truth Movement, the controlled demolition of the buildings was almost like something we just didn't talk about. In fact, when you spoke to people, they would always say, I don't lead with the buildings. I don't lead with the buildings. And if you remember the 9/11 omission hearings, the 9/11 People's Commission, which was Pacifica Radio, the 9/11 congressional briefing, which Cynthia McKinney held in July of 2005, I think, in Washington, D.C., a year after the release of the 9/11 report. None of those conferences or the congressional briefings talked about the buildings at all, showing how much more there is about 9/11 that needs to be discussed. And it wasn't until June of 2005, I think, Morgan Reynolds, do you remember him?
Oh yeah, the Bush economist.
Bush economist, Bush official, Bush administration official, came out saying that it was a controlled demolition. And then people were like, oh, well, it's a Bush administration official. So we have to, that the argument became more popular. And when it
was also the no planer, the no big Boeings hit the towers, and
right
didn't match, and all this weird stuff.
And a pivotal moment of the 9/11 Truth Movement actually has to do with Tucker Carlson, as far as I'm concerned. Stephen, we were begging and pleading with the media to give us some coverage of things like the 9/11 congressional briefing, and they would just ignore us. No matter how many email campaigns we had, it didn't matter. They were just ignoring us. And then sometime, I think November 2005, Stephen Jones came out with his article about a hypothesis for Deseret News. And I think he came out on a Friday, and on that following Monday, he was on Tucker Carlson's show, so Tucker Carlson could do his best to make him look like a fool, by not showing the coverage of WTC7 and so forth. And then the footage, the video I think you're looking for, the next day, he told us to leave the country. If you actually believe that your government killed 3,000 of its own people, then you should leave the country.
Welcome back. Millions of people watched the horror of 9/11 right before their very eyes, live on television. 2 planes crashing into the World Trade Center, and less than a couple of hours later, both towers, of course, collapsing. My next guest says that hijackers may not have brought down the towers by themselves. Here to explain his controversial theory, Stephen Jones. He's a professor of physics at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. Professor Jones, thanks for coming on.
Sure, thanks, Tucker.
Well, just sum up this. Obviously, your theory, just the one sentence that I just explained in the intro, contradicts what we all think we know about how these towers collapsed. Quickly sum up your explanation for what happened.
Well, I'd like to start with this paper that you referred to. It's available online. What I'm doing, Tucker, is presenting evidence but it's a hypothesis to be tested. That's a big difference from a conclusion. And so I just wanted to clarify that. But to sum up, I've looked at the official reports by FEMA and so on regarding the collapse of these buildings.
Right.
I'd like to look at the collapse of Building 7 in just a minute. It was not even hit by a jet, so we should look at that one.
The two towers, the explanation has been that the fire inside was so intense that it weakened the structural steel and that each floor collapsed down upon the next in a pancake fashion, and they imploded in on themselves. Is that essentially, I think, what people think?
Yeah, that's basically it, yeah. And so what I've done is to analyze these reports. But I would like to do a little experiment with you, Tucker, if I could. I sent out a video clip of the collapse of Building 7, because most people haven't actually seen that one, and that's the crux of the argument that I'm presenting.
Okay, sum up very quickly the argument for us. You believe there were explosives in the buildings planted by someone, detonated.
Well, yeah.
Is that correct?
In other words, the hypothesis to be tested is there's two hypotheses here. One is fire and damage caused all three buildings to collapse.
Okay.
The other is that explosives in the buildings may have caused the collapse. And so then we analyze and see which fits the data better. And I've done that in my 25-page paper.
I want to read you a quote from the Deseret Morning News, a paper in Utah from you. I'm quoting now. It is quite plausible that explosives were pre-planted in all three buildings and set off after the two plane crashes, which were actually a diversion tactic. Muslims are probably not to blame for bringing down the World Trade Center buildings after all. That's, I would think, pretty offensive to a lot of people listening. Do you have any evidence for that? I mean,
well, not to the Muslims, I might say.
Well, that's a good.
I've had a lot of emails.
I'm sure your writings have been greeted with glee in Islamabad and Peshawar and places like that. But for Americans,
well, I haven't received any notes from there, but just good people. I have Muslim friends. Let me read, for example, but I'm not going to let you off the hook. I really want to do this experiment with you.
We don't have a lot of time for experiments, Professor, but if you could just...
Well,
it cuts him off again. The experiment is seeing if they will play the actual clip of Building 7 collapsing live on the air. And
and he won't do it. And so that created Stephen Jones was, fumbling with his words and so forth, and it didn't make him look good. But one thing that this whole, the debunkers at the time kept asking us for an expert to come forward and say that it was a controlled demolition. They wanted their expert. And then finally, Stephen Jones came out, and then we had the expert. But then because Tucker Carlson made him look like a fool, they attacked the argument of controlled demolition. That made some people in the 9/11 Truth Movement feel the need to defend Stephen Jones as well as the argument of controlled demolition. And I believe that was the point when the 9/11 Truth Movement's direction went from supporting the 9/11 families, promoting the unanswered questions of the 9/11 families, pointing out the ridiculousness of the 9/11 Commission and its report, to focusing on the buildings. I think that's when that happened.
Yeah. And I thought the buildings was a good argument, so I kind of went along with that for a while, and I was always curious about, who could have planted the...
But the thing is, I'm not qualified to tell anybody what happened to those buildings. As a matter of fact, 99% of the 9/11 Truth Movement isn't qualified to tell anybody what happened to those buildings. So I tend to focus on other things. But if the question of how those buildings came down is important to some of the family members, then it's an important question to me. but that doesn't mean that I have to constantly promote that, the controlled demolition of the buildings. And I always choose to keep it simple. Most things that I write as if I'm trying to talk to a new person, not the choir, but a new person, trying to plant seeds so that they would start asking questions in their own minds about what might have happened. Why did this certain thing happen? Like, for instance, in January of 2002, Bush and Cheney went to Tom Daschle's office and asked him explicitly not to investigate 9/11 at all. Okay? Why? Why would the president and vice president, of all people, not want to know exactly how and why this happened so as to make sure it could never happen again? That's a simple question for people. And the obvious answer is because, well, maybe there's a cover up. Maybe there are things that they don't want us to know about regarding 9/11. And as a matter of fact, as Israel is destroying Gaza at the moment, Benjamin Netanyahu is using some of the same arguments that Cheney and Bush were using regarding 9/11, that we can't take the forces away from the war on terror. We need to focus on the war first, then we'll investigate what happened. But for other things like Pearl Harbor, commissions were set up within days of the event happening.
Yeah, and then when he got, remember when he shot the other his hunting partner in the face there?
And he apologized.
2006? That was pretty wild.
He
A lot of
he
hunters
sh-
had some stuff to say about Dick Cheney. And
he shot his friend in the face, and that friend actually apologized to Dick Cheney. That was the weirdest thing. Cheney should have been locked up for that.
yeah, he should have been arrested right there. Any one
Yeah,
of us, any one of you, if you went out hunting, the police would be asking like anything. This happened to anyone else on the planet, you'd be arrested, and the police would be like, you'd be a suspect.
exactly.
There's a shooting and a victim.
Right, but that's because there's a two-tier justice system in this country. There's one where the laws apply to the people, and then there's one where the laws don't apply to the higher ups,
Right. And
the
that's
elite.
existed since the FBI was founded under Hoover, who was himself a homosexual who pursued other homosexuals and prosecuted homosexuals for being homosexuals.
And he
So,
dressed up in women's clothing
yeah.
and so forth.
So, like, these people are, they're sick. They're disgusting. And that's
Yeah.
who set up the FBI. Now, the FBI's involvement in 9/11, it's interesting. Louis Freeh was the FBI director, involved in multiple, just scandal after scandal. Then he leaves shortly before 9/11, and another really interesting guy takes over, Robert Mueller, right? Mueller.
Right.
Robert Mueller is just famous for just being this, the cover-up guy.
Wasn't he involved? Didn't he have something to do with the cover-up of Iran-Contra? I don't remember. But
Yeah, I don't know that. I know that. Who did have? I know that did have ties to Iran-Contra was Rudy Giuliani.
yeah,
Did you know that Rudy Giuliani, the mayor of New York on 9/11, was he prosecuted BCCI during the and then it turns out that he prosecuted them rather poorly, and then after that stint as U.S. prosecutor, he went to go work for White and Case, which was the law firm that defended BCCI in
right.
the trial. So he's
You're talking
switched
about.
sides.
Here's something interesting. You mentioned Louis Freeh. Do you remember when Prince Bandar was being investigated for the BAE scandal?
Yeah, and who was
And
his
he
lawyer?
Louis Freeh was his lawyer. Exactly. It's just amazing, like the circles that they run in. They all run in the same circles. And Bandar was, involved in the Iran-Contra affair. And I honestly believe I'm somebody who admits to myself that I don't know the truth about 9/11 or who was ultimately responsible. When I did admit that to myself, I became a better advocate for 9/11 justice.
All you have to do is go after the people that covered this up and show
Yeah.
the people in charge of who are supposed to investigate and protect the American people. We let the foxes in charge of the hen house.
Well, there's a phrase from the Nixon era, it's not the crime that gets you, it's the cover-up. And how much evidence or examples do we have of them attempting to cover up this or that about 9/11, about omitting information, blatantly lying about information, not allowing whistleblowers to testify before the 9/11 Commission? I mean, there's so many things. You know, the Bush administration forced the FBI to keep Abdusattar Sheikh from testifying before the Joint Congressional Inquiry into 9/11. He was somebody who rented apartments to two of the hijackers, I believe. And Stephen Butler, he was an FBI informant, Abdusattar Sheikh, and Stephen Butler was his handler. And he said that if he had been given information about the two hijackers, they could have essentially stopped 9/11. But anyway, there are just so many examples of them attempting. You know, they fought against the families for an investigation into the 9/11 attacks. The families actually had to fight. In fact, Lori Van Auken, who was a Jersey girl or a September 11th advocate, said to me once that at a time when her children were traumatized by the loss of their father, they had to go down to Washington, D.C. to fight for something that should have automatically happened.
Right, and it didn't. You know, one of the most revealing is the fact that Bush and Cheney refused to testify to the 9/11 Commission unless they could both be together.
I made a movie about that on my channel. It's called Publicly, Separately, Accountable for Lies.
Certain members of the commission will be allowed to review classified documents from the White House, and their notes will be subject to administration review. Today, some relatives of people who were killed in the attacks criticized the agreement, and our next guest, who's a member of the commission, claimed the deal is disgusting. Former Georgia Senator Max Clelland, a Democrat, joins me here in Washington. Senator, thanks so much for joining us.
Yes,
some of the members of the commission say this is a fair compromise. First of all, what's the deal? What's the notion of this agreement?
Well, you've used the word deal 3 times. I don't think the 9/11 Commission ought to be making deals with our own government under the responsibility we have from the Congress and our responsibility to the American people
The White
to
House
get all the facts, about all the commissioners. Look at those facts. Now, we've had to subpoena the FAA for those documents. We've had to subpoena NORAD for those documents. I'm in favor of subpoenaing the White House for the documents we need so that all the commissioners can get to see all the documents that we need. That's the only way we can face the American people and the families and say we have done a thorough investigation independently of the White House and the entire executive branch.
Some of the commissioners, including Richard Ben-Veniste, who's a Democrat, a former Watergate prosecutor, says this is a fair arrangement. 4 members of the commission will be able to have access to these classified documents. They'll be able to review them and eventually make some of the information available to the other members of the commission, depending on what the White House says.
Secondhand. I mean, I'm a member of the commission. The president has said only a minority of the commission can see a minority of the documents, and then they have to clear what they're going to say to the rest of the commission with the White House.
If you're one of those 4 that gets to see these documents, would that change your opinion?
No, because all the members of the commission are legitimate members of the commission. We have the top security clearances. We're an independent commission. For an independent operational look at why 9/11 happened, what happened there, when what the president and the government knew, and when they knew it.
What's their argument? The White House. Why won't they let you see this? What do they say?
Access. They don't want any more eyeballs to see their documents than they can possibly get away with. It's a scam. It's absolutely disgusting. This is an independent commission looking at the most serious attack on this homeland since the British invaded this country in the War of 1812. This is important. We cannot do our responsibilities if we don't have all of us access to all the documents we need, including what's in the White House. Now, we've already had to go to the wall for documents with the FAA and NORAD in a subpoena.
So why do you
I think we ought to subpoena the White House documents and get on with this investigation.
Why do you think your chairman, the former Republican governor of New Jersey?
I want to say something about the subpoena. The families fought for the 9/11 Commission to have subpoena power. They used their subpoena power only 3 times. I think it was the FAA, NORAD, and another one. Instead, they used what were called document requests, which could be and were ignored in many cases. Now, to give you an idea, the Mueller investigation into Russiagate, they used their subpoena power 2,800 times. The 9/11 Commission used theirs 3. So,
What?
Yep.
That is, I mean, this is a miscarriage of justice in any way you look at it. Senator Clelland is an American hero for speaking up. And,
well, here's some quotes I have from Max. Quote, the 9/11 Commission, quote, will not issue subpoenas for the documents I want and will have a single nonpartisan staff headed by Executive Director Philip Zelikow, who is close to National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, end quote. Quote, it was painfully obvious to me that there was this blanket over the commission. Anybody who spoke out or dissented, whether against George Bush, the White House, or the war against Iraq, was going to be marginalized, end quote. The 9/11 Commission is a, quote, national scandal. I'm not going to be part of the looking at information only partially. I'm not going to be part of just coming to quick conclusions. I'm not going to be part of political pressure to do this or that, or not do that. I'm not going to be part of that. This is serious. As each day goes by, we learn that this government knew a whole lot more about these terrorists before September 11th than it has ever admitted, end quote. That's from Max Clelland.
yeah, I think Bush's face right here kind of says it all. I mean, he looks like a kid who got caught with his hand in the cookie jar.
Yeah, could you possibly show the video I made called Publicly, Separately, like go to my channel and do a search for it, or?
Yeah, let's.
I think they found it to be useful. Yeah, Adam.
Mr. President,
Yes.
don't you think
This
the
is the best
families
one.
deserve to have a transcript or to be able to see what
Adam,
you
you
said?
asked me that question yesterday.
For an
I
answer
got the
today.
same answer, yeah.
Say with any confidence that there are no Al Qaeda operatives active in the country today.
No, I can't say that.
I can ask you about that.
No, they didn't. But I'm not going to get any more details about what they asked me. I told you I wasn't going to get into details about what they asked me, and then I just fell into your trap. But no, let me talk about vulnerabilities, and I got to get back to work. We are still vulnerable to attack. And
Yeah, all right. That's why we haven't been attacked since, right?
Just type in publicly.
What is that?
The word
So-
publicly. There it is. Now watch that video.
The whole thing?
Yep.
the vice president and I just finished a good conversation with the 911 Commission. It was wide-ranging. It was important. It was just a good discussion, and I appreciate the members. I want to thank the chairman and vice chairman for bringing the commission here and giving us a chance to share views on different subjects. And they had a lot of good questions, and I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I took the time. This is an important commission, and it's important that they ask the questions they ask so that they can help make recommendations necessary to better protect our homeland. And but it was I enjoyed it.
In this morning's New York Times lead editorial, the president's testimony It would have been a pleasure to be able to congratulate President Bush on his openness in agreeing to sit down today with the Independent Commission on the 9/11 attacks and answer questions. Unfortunately, Mr. Bush conditioned his cooperation on stipulations that range from the questionable to the ridiculous. The strangest of the president's conditions is that he will testify only in concert with Vice President Dick Cheney. The White House has given no sensible reason for why Mr. Bush is unwilling to appear alone. Further down in the editorial, they write, given the White House's concern for portraying Mr. Bush as a strong leader, it's remarkable that this critical appearance is being structured in a way that is certain to provide fodder for late-night comedians who enjoy depicting him as a docile puppet of his vice president. Blackwood, New Jersey, good morning.
Good morning.
What's your reaction to the president and vice president in front of the 9/11 Commission this morning?
I think their methodology is quite interesting, that both of them would go in to a closed session and instead of becoming like public, going on live like Condoleezza Rice did, it kind of like speaks for itself. It says to me that we're not going to get the truth about anything they have to say.
Our next call comes from Houston, Texas. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. I think that people are so blind when they call in. Why is Bush requesting that it's not under oath, that there's no transcript taken, that there's no audio transcript taken, that there's no written transcript taken, that Dick Cheney has to be with him holding his hand under the table like the Olsen twins? Why do they have to be together?
President, what topic did the commissioners want to spend most of the time on? And were there any subjects that you didn't answer or were advised by your counsel not to answer?
I was never advised by my counsel not to answer anything. I answered every question they asked. I probably best that I not go into the details of the conversation and let them incorporate into their report. There was a lot of interest, excuse me, a lot of interest in about how to better protect America. In other words, they're very interested in the recommendations that they're going to lay out, and I'm interested in those as well. And we discussed a lot of things, Terry, a lot of subjects. It was a very cordial conversation. I was impressed by the questions, and it was I think it helped them understand how I think and how I run the White House and how we deal with threats.
Grand Rapids, Michigan. Go ahead.
Yes, I have a point to make after I say what I think of the two testifying together. I think that they're babysitting each other. In fact, I think Cheney is babysitting George Bush.
Long Island, New York. What's your reaction to the president and vice president in front of the 9/11 Commission today?
As a Republican voting for both of them, I was very shocked to see that there's no tape, nothing going to be taken on him, because I was very surprised that he's going to be going up there talking. I mean, any court you go into, you always have people taking records what you're saying. And why is that him? What make him so great? I vote for him in the last election, which I was going to vote for him this election too. But I have to think about it. And thank you very much for taking my call.
Our next call comes from Dayton, Ohio. Good morning, Dayton.
Good morning. As far as Bush and Cheney testifying together, it just enforces my opinion that Bush doesn't have an original thought of his own, and he can't stand on his own 2 feet.
John.
President, as you know, a lot of critics suggested that you wanted to appear jointly with the vice president so that you two could keep your story straight or something.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what you think of the value of appearing together and how you would answer those critics?
Yeah, first of all, look, I mean, if we had something to hide, we wouldn't have met with them in the first place. We answered all their questions. And
after a huge battle to get them to testify, we wouldn't have met with them in the first place. They refused to meet with the 9/11 Commission for the longest time. And finally, because of the pressure from the families and so forth, they finally had to testify. I mean, I think even Bill Clinton allowed, transcripts and whatever.
The House Select Committee on Assassinations 13 years after the Kennedy assassination, and we're going on 20 years after 9/11, and they've completely blacklisted this. They don't even talk about 9/11 on the news anymore.
No, they won't. Most people don't talk about 9/11. One of the things I wanted to accomplish in my activism is to at least get writers for alternative press like Glenn Greenwald or Jeremy Scahill, that when they write about stories that include 9/11, to at least acknowledge within that story that we don't know the truth about that day, as opposed to acting as if we do know the truth about that day when they write their articles and so forth. That's one of the things I've wanted to accomplish, and I can't do it. I just can't do it. There was a time, Bill Moyers, do you remember him? He made a documentary called The Secret Government about Iran-Contra.
Bill Mayer.
Bill Moyers. He wrote a hit piece against 9/11 Truth People, and this is something I wrote to him in a response. This is part of it. Quote, "It is well known and said by many that after the 9/11 attacks, the media in this country did not do its job. Dan Rather said on May 17, 2002, quote, there was a time in South Africa that people would put flaming tires around people's necks if they dissented, and in some ways the fear is that you will be necklaced here. You will have a flaming tire of lack of patriotism put around your neck. Now it is that fear that keeps journalists from asking the toughest of the tough questions," end quote. On April 25th, 2007, Dan Rather told Bill Moyers that, quote, "There's no question that we didn't do a good job. We weren't smart enough, we weren't alert enough, we didn't dig deep enough, and we shouldn't have been fooled in this way," end quote. And Helen Thomas was adamant that the media's failure after 9/11, she said, they rolled over and played dead, end quote. That's what the media did. You know.
Yeah, Tucker Carlson included. And now that Tucker Carlson's come back on the scene and said, no, I'm going to take a new look at these things that, I wasn't paying attention to before. He's talking about UFOs, and now he's got Alex Jones on the show.
Oh, God.
Alex Jones, I kind of watched him. I followed him a little bit back when Terror Storm came out and Endgame, the police state series, and he was going over all. He's always been this, it's the apocalypse, it's the end of the world type guy, when he started going down about 10 years ago, that's when he started going down the crisis actor rabbit hole with. He started saying that the Sandy Hooks didn't happen, the victims weren't real, and he also said the same thing about the Boston Marathon bombing.
Right.
It came home to me, being a native of Boston and New England here. So I did my own investigation of that, and I submitted it to InfoWars, and. Rather than going with the truth and the real story, they went with this guy, this InfoWars reporter out of Rhode Island, who was, sending them information saying that it was a conspiracy, and that's when I realized. And this guy his name was Dan Bidondi, and he's actually a professional wrestler, an amateur wrestler. So he's like WWE, and that's when I realized that Alex Jones was like the Wrestling Federation. This is the guy right here. I mean, Alex Jones. He talks like one of those, wrestling announcers.
He does.
This is the people that he kind of keeps company with, these types of, you find that comparison accurate, that Alex Jones is like the WWF of the conspiracy world?
What you gonna do when the New World Order runs wild on you? Yes. Yeah. I would say very much so. He sounds just like a wrestler when he's talking, when he's giving, and I don't follow Alex Jones. In fact, I wrote an article called The Boy Who Cried Wolf, and it addressed the issue of saying that everything that happens is a conspiracy. Everything.
Yeah.
The phrase false flag attack is something Alex Jones loved to use for so many different things, and it discredited, it took away from what we were trying to say about 9/11.
Yeah.
and I wrote about him in my book, and I was nice. I did not attack Alex in my book. I said that he's part of the conspiracy theory industry. He's a businessman. He's trying to make money, and that was being nice. But he's a jackass because the way that he acted on television, if he was representative of us, he should have known that and been genuine. Talk about the families, talk about the 9/11 Commission. I begged every time somebody went on the television, I would beg them to talk about the 9/11 families, to talk about the 9/11 Commission. When you're an activist, even if you've written a book and you're an author, when you get precious TV time, you become an activist, and you have to put forward the best information possible
Right.
in that case. And nobody that ever got TV time ever did that.
No.
They always talked about their pet theories and whatnot. And I believe that the media essentially chose people that would do that kind of thing in order to paint us all in a certain light. The
I
media
remember
can
the
pick.
early interviews, like Sean Hannity would come on with Alan Combs. It would be Hannity and Combs, and they would have James Fetzer on.
Oh God!
And James Fetzer is another one who's all crisis actors and calling crisis actors on Sandy Hook and all this other stuff.
James Fetzer has a history of being a problem in the JFK movement.
Yeah, that's right.
Joan Mellon wrote about a time that he had to be dragged out of one of her speaking engagements, I think, because he was trying to start so much trouble. I think the police had to be called. I'm not sure. You might have to ask her. But I know that he's been a problem everywhere he goes. And in fact, when he first came into the 9/11 Truth movement, and they started Scholars for 9/11 Truth,
Yep.
Stephen Jones, David Ray Griffin, Jim Fetzer, they had a website. And on that website, they were promoting a group called Wing TV. Are you familiar with them?
No.
Lisa Giuliani and Victor Thorne. They constantly attack people from the 9/11truth.org steering committee, individuals. All they did was attack people. And then I saw on the Scholars for 9/11 Truth site that they were promoting their website. So I contacted them, and they took it down. But the reason that it was put on there was because of Jim Fetzer, who frequently was a guest on their show.
Right.
They were notorious for
So they would
attacking
have these
people.
guys on to basically like straw man the 9/11 truth arguments and stuff. I remember this other guy that they had on who just they made fun of him so bad, and he had the worst theories. It was almost like I swear he was a plant.
There was a show called Penn and Teller's Bullshit.
Yes.
Where
Penn
Eric,
Jillette encouraged the viewers to push people like us down a flight of stairs.
right, and who they interviewed was Eric Huffschmid and Jimmy Waters, I forget his last name. And Eric Huffschmid looked like a fool when he was asked, why on earth would the government do something like murder 3,000 of its own people? He had no idea why they would do such, like, to start wars, to project America's hegemony, money, stuff like that. He didn't even say any of that. And Jimmy Walters, who was a millionaire and used to pay for conferences where William Rodriguez would go to speak, where Eric Huffschmid would go to speak.
Yeah.
He dressed up as an astronaut on Penn and Teller's show and clucked like a chicken. He made total fools of us.
Yeah.
And those are the types of people the media focused on. The ones who would be fools on television.
Yeah, exactly. So Penn and Teller on 9/11. Oh, that was, yeah, the bullshit after 9/11. Oh, yeah, these guys were, they did a whole thing on conspiracy theories, and yeah, they were just.
Yeah. What was that group that used to check conspiracy theories to see if they were true or not? Mythbusters, or is that what they were called?
Oh, yeah, remember that they never touched 9/11 though.
Yeah, they never touched 9/11.
Mythbusters, yeah, they would bust all these myths, but they never did a Mythbusters 9/11.
Right, exactly.
But you know what's interesting? There was a show called it was 9/11 Wins Physics Competition, right? So there was this one show where they had a TV show, and the girl who won they had a question about dropping a bowling ball from 5 feet onto several panes of glass, and how many panes would it smash? And they gave them all the numbers and told them to figure out the physics and the calculation. And the girl said that she found like these formulas on a 9/11 website, and she won, and she actually was the one that won the contest. And I'm trying to find that. Again, you can't find these things anymore. This is old stuff. But yeah, I remember that one. I'll have to find that show. I'll find it in post editing and put it in. But let's move along now from all the, I'm into the 9/11 physics because there's a lot of physics there, and
Right, I'm not a physicist, and I can't stand when people say even a fifth grader could understand that this is a controlled demolition. That's not how you draw people in. You're essentially saying that you're an idiot.
Yeah.
If you don't get this. And as far as the controlled demolition of buildings, I am an idiot. I've never done it. I've never designed a building. See, in my view, you shouldn't have to be a physicist, an engineer, a scientist, an architect to understand the need for 9/11 justice.
right. And
That's my
and
view.
it definitely shouldn't just be about. It's not just about the buildings. There's so many other questions than just the Twin Towers and Building 7 collapsing.
Well, but that's what the 9/11 Truth Movement turned into. It actually turned into a cult-like thing. They would create litmus tests. Like, do you believe there was a controlled demolition? You don't? Oh, then you're a lie hopper, or you're not a real 9/11 truther, or whatever. And I couldn't stand that. And I tried to be a team player. There's so much stuff on my website about Stephen Jones that it's unbelievable. And I want to talk about something regarding the buildings. When Stephen Jones first came out, he said that he had a hypothesis to be tested. If the buildings people kept it at the hypothesis level, as opposed to stating that this is factually what happened,
Right.
they would have done a lot better, I think. Just like I admitted to myself that I don't know the truth about 9/11.
Yeah, that was a much better position to take, a stronger.
Absolutely, absolutely. But instead, the buildings people have turned it into a fact. I can't stand any theory that's presented as fact. Flight 77 didn't hit the Pentagon. A missile hit the Pentagon. Anything. It was holograms. Oh, that's one of my videos.
Yeah, speaking of the missile hit the Pentagon theory, what are your thoughts on Barbara Honegger?
I don't like Barbara Honegger. I think she's discrediting. Most people in my circles agree with me that she is discrediting. But there was a time when she wasn't seen that way. And she's used that credibility to, worm her way into different 9/11 truth groups and stuff like that. For instance, Bill Moyer's documentary, The Secret Government, that I spoke of earlier, actually has Barbara Honegger in it, as well as Peter Dale Scott, who is a mentor of mine.
So I know 9/11 Press for Truth is going to be one of these, but what are your top 3 documentaries that you would say you've ever watched?
Top 3 documentaries: 9/11 Dust and Deceit, which is about the environmental impact of 9/11 and how it affected New Yorkers and 9/11 first responders. In their own words, The Untold Stories of the 9/11 Families, which is actually the sequel to 9/11 Press for Truth. It's everything that didn't make it into the main documentary. Some people say it's actually better than Press for Truth. And then obviously 9/11 Press for Truth would be my third. It would be my first, but you know.
Those count as well. We'll count part 1 and part 2 as one. Can you give me one more?
One more that I liked. I like Who Killed John O'Neill. I remember years ago I saw that when it first came out, and I really enjoyed it. Did you ever see that one?
Yeah, it was the guy that he played all the characters himself.
Yeah.
Monologue story.
Like he went through the different phases people go through as they learn the truth, or
Right.
learn different truths. And I like that very much.
Yeah.
Another one, I didn't like the reflecting pool. I can't remember. I honestly don't promote anything other than 9/11 Press for Truth. I don't trust. A long time ago, I would promote other people's work, and I would get burned several times. Promoting David Ray Griffin's work, and a debunker would come out and debunk me and make me look like an idiot. So I became a devil's advocate for everything. I would look at all sides of arguments. I would study the debunkers' websites and look at their arguments, and it improved my own arguments, with regard to 9/11. Another thing that changed the direction of the 9/11 truth movement to be all about the buildings was, in fact, the debunkers. I don't know if you remember when they first came out, they only focused on the buildings. They could only talk about the buildings. If you tried to talk about anything else with the debunkers, they would always try to bring it back to the buildings.
Right.
So that helped.
Like you watch my debate I did with Mick West. He did the same thing. I wanted to bring it about the I did a little bit on the thermite and stuff, but I found much stronger arguments when I just started talking about the companies involved, like who was in charge of the Pentagon, who was in charge of this, who was in charge of that, who ran, the Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld connection with the continuity of government program. That one has always been a big one for me personally. The Armageddon plan. They have these Armageddon planning think tanks in the 80s that Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, they used to go to Andrews Air Force Base like every other weekend for throughout the whole Reagan administration, and what they would do is meet and discuss strategy on every possible scenario, stuff just like 9/11 and how to plan against it.
Well, on the day of 9/11, they activated continuity of government. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I have a video on my website, on my YouTube channel. Mark Dayton questions multiple people about FAA and NORAD. He talks to Philip Zelikow, and Philip Zelikow talks about what's the plane called that was up in the skies? The
E4B.
E1, huh?
The E4B.
Yeah, the E4B plane, the mystery plane or whatever.
Yeah.
Mark Dayton questioned him about that, and he said that had to do with continuity of government, and continuity of government didn't affect 9/11, so we didn't address it in the 9/11 Commission, even though the 9/11 Commission's mandate was to give a full and complete accounting of the 9/11 attacks. So everything they omitted from their report shows that they failed miserably at their mandate.
Right. Yeah, there's so much more that needs to be investigated, like the doomsday plane, the continuity of government program that it was initiated on 9/11. They had everything there to protect us. And what was Dick Cheney doing on 9/11? Because this is really important.
Well,
Because there's been controversy over this about the stand down orders.
okay, I'll tell you.
Policy. I think I'll let you speak because you get this right.
Okay. For years, we had Norman Minetta's testimony, which basically said that Dick Cheney went down to the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, the PEOC, before the Pentagon was hit. And even on 3 separate occasions, I saw Norman Minetta questioned about that, and he told the same story. So for years, we thought Dick Cheney went down to the PEOC earlier than the 9/11 report reported. And then a few years ago, they released photographs of Dick Cheney sitting in his office with his legs up on his desk watching as the towers burned. Do you remember that? And the time on the television showed that he could not have been in the Pentagon or in the PEOC before the Pentagon was hit. So what I did is I took all of that Norman Minetta information and stuff, and I put that on the shelf to look at later. The big issue concerning Dick Cheney is that Dick Cheney was not part of the military chain of command at all. He had no authority whatsoever to give orders to anybody in the military on 9/11, and yet he was giving orders to the military. And as a result, pilots did not listen to him. So what he did was create a de facto stand down because the pilots would not listen to him. I want to find a quote from the article I wrote about the military chain of command. Hold on. Okay. This is from an article called "The Shot Heard Round the World," and it talks about, okay, Cheney testified to the 9/11 Commission that he spoke with President Bush before giving an order to shoot down a hijacked civilian airliner that appeared headed toward Washington. The plane was United Flight 93, which crashed in a Pennsylvania field after a brave revolt by the passengers. But a source close to the commission who declined to be identified, revealing sensitive information, says that most of the staffers who worked on this aspect of the investigation didn't believe Cheney's versions of events. A draft of the report conveyed their skepticism, but when top White House officials, including Chief of Staff Andy Card and the then White House counsel Alberto Gonzales, reviewed the draft, they became extremely agitated. After a prolonged battle, the report was toned down. The factual narrative, closely read, offers no evidence that Cheney sought initial authorization from the president. The point is not a small one. Legally, Cheney was required to get permission from his commander-in-chief, who was traveling but reachable at the time. If the public ever found out that Cheney gave the order on his own, it would have strongly fed the view that he was the real power behind the throne. But the point of there you go, you're showing the pictures that I talked about. If you look at the timestamp on those photos of the television, it was after the Pentagon was hit. So I can't prove that these photos are fake. Can you?
No. I mean,
Like, I have no evidence that these photographs are fake. So I can't put forward the Norman Minetta information anymore. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he literally committed a crime. Like I said, they said legally it's a big concern because he was not part of the military chain of command, and yet he was giving orders to the military without seeking approval from the president. even though they stated they did seek approval. And the president, I think, testified that he did give approval for Cheney to do it. But regardless, that's a big issue that Cheney could be arrested for, I think. I would think.
Yeah, I mean, if in a real investigation, he would be considered a suspect. And
Oh well, this is how I look at 9/11. I don't look at 9/11 as an act of war. I look at 9/11 as a crime. And as with every crime, there are suspects for that crime. And because of their own actions, elements within our government and other governments have more than earned the title of suspect for the crime of 9/11. That's how I look at 9/11. And there are many suspects that should have been investigated.
Let's talk about some names about who you would like, if you could subpoena all the documents and know all their activities on 9/11 and in the 2 years leading up to 9/11.
Richard Myers, Ralph Eberhardt, the FAA people who recorded a tape directly after 9/11, and then that tape was destroyed. Are you familiar with that story?
Is that Mike Canavan?
I'm sorry? Yeah, no. Mike Canavan was the hijack coordinator who was supposed to be there.
How about Benedict Sliney, the FAA?
Yeah. I forget the whole
Wall Street
story.
attorney. Basically, Benedict Sliney, right? Benedict Sliney.
It's usually
Sliney.
Ben
He was a Wall
Sliney.
Street lawyer. They hired him to head the FAA on 9/11 first, with no experience, first day on the job, and then he left like right after.
Right, and then there were also people who were scattered across the world who should have been in their positions that day who weren't. And Mike Canavan was the hijack coordinator, and I did a lot of research into this. He was in Puerto Rico that day, and there was somebody else who actually took over for him that day, but they also called out sick, so it went to someone else. I don't remember the names off the top of my head. I posted this in my Substack, the names of the individuals who were named the hijack coordinator, besides just Mike Canavan. But I don't know them off the top of my head. George Tennant is somebody. Richard Armitage is somebody. Paul Wolfowitz.
Not a lot of people talk about Richard Armitage.
He's
Talk about him
disgusting.
a little bit more.
I couldn't watch. The families. He was sent to testify before the 9/11 Commission in the stead of Condoleezza Rice. Like they put him forward to appease everybody instead of putting forward Condoleezza Rice. And when he testified, the families walked out in protest. And when you watched the testimony, it was disgusting. The commissioners were asking him. One of them asked him about basketball, whether he was enjoying basketball or not. That was one thing I couldn't stand about the 9/11 Commission, is how they were so soft with all of the people they investigated. That the banter back and forth was just a waste of time.
Basketball in an official government hearing.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah, Richard Armitage, who had ties to the Pakistani ISI, wasn't he part of Iran-Contra?
Yeah, he was. That's where I remember him from.
See, that's what I mean. I don't know what happened on 9/11, but I do believe that the system that brought us Iran-Contra is the same system that brought us 9/11.
Yeah, well, Armitage and Ted Shackley, the White Ghost there, they were both directly responsible for 9/11. I mean, directly responsible for the Iran-Contra scandal. So it's not surprising that these same kind of people would have been, connected to 9/11. One of the things that the Kuwaiti American Corporation, have you ever heard of them?
The Kuwaiti American Corporation?
Yeah, it's called Kuwam.
Oh, I've heard of them, yes.
Kuwam. And Kuwam, one of these companies connected to a lot of this Iran-Contra stuff, they were also the parent company of Securicom Stratosec.
It was the security company for...
That was the security company that ran security at the World Trade Centers on 9/11. They put all the cameras and badging access to the World Trade
Right.
Center on 9/11, which I thought that was an interesting connection. Marvin Bush sat on the board of directors for that company, the president's brother. You ever hear about the maid that was killed in his driveway? She ran herself over with the car.
I think I've heard of the story. One suspect that nobody talks about, and in fact, he wasn't even listed as a suspect in Kevin Ryan's book, which I have not read. I just looked to see who the suspects were, is Prince Bandar. Why is he rarely spoken of? This is a man who is intimately familiar with the terrorist system, with using terrorists for proxies, in war and stuff like that. In fact, during the BAE scandal, he threatened Britain with a terrorist attack unless they dropped the investigation. In March of 2001, he and George Bush had a discussion, and that discussion revolved around the need for decisive military action in Iraq. So here's the President of the United States speaking with somebody about wanting to go to war with Iraq, who happened to be one of the financiers of 9/11, who may have had more involvement than that, even, we just found out, who gave us the pretext that allowed us to go into Iraq, isn't what qualifies as suspicious behavior. They should be, and right now Bandar refuses to testify for the 9/11 families in their lawsuit.
Right.
Refuses. And we just found out that Omar al-Bayoumi, who is somebody who helped two of the hijackers in San Diego, answered directly to Prince Bandar. And Prince Bandar admitted that the Saudi intelligence was following all of the terrorists, quote, with precision.
Yeah, there's a whole, the Sarasota house.
Yeah. But this Bandar is separate from Sarasota. Have you ever heard of the Aspen Strategy Group?
No,
It's a group.
Aspen Strategy Group. I've heard of the Carlyle Group, which held its annual offices on September 11th every year in the suites of the Saudi embassy at the Watergate Hotel. Right?
The Aspen Strategy Group is a group located, I think, in Colorado, which is they have neocons that come speak for them. I think Bill Kristol has spoken for them. Philip Zelikow, I think, was the president of the organization at one time. And Prince Bandar also belonged to this organization.
Interesting. Well, another tie between Philip Zelikow. So the 9/11 Commission, it took them 441 days to start this, that you show in your documentary Press for Truth, right? And who's the first guy that they hired to head the 9/11 Commission?
Well, they first hired Henry Kissinger to be the chairman of the 9/11 Commission. But because of a meeting that the families had with him in his New York offices, and a question that was asked of him about whether or not he had any clients by the name of Bin Laden, Patty Casaza described him as almost falling out of his chair. When he was asked that question, he resigned the next day. And do you know who was involved in selecting these people, or who was responsible for selecting these people?
No.
Karl Rove. Karl Rove was instrumental in the creation of the 9/11 Commission. That's why when we hear that Karl Rove was speaking directly with Philip Zelikow and Philip Zelikow is telling his secretaries not to keep those notes. First of all, John Judge, and there's a video on my YouTube channel called The 9/11 Omission Hearings, John Judge, and the 9/11 Omission Report. He spoke a lot about the 9/11 report itself, and how the White House vetted each and every chapter of that book. So essentially, the 9/11 report was co-written with the White House. Did you know that? Like, I talk about the 9/11 Commission, the process of the 9/11 Commission, the time they had, the funding they had, and all that stuff. The different idiosyncrasies of the 9/11 Commission, or intricacies, I don't know what the word is. But it was absolutely corrupt and compromised. The 9/11 families had a 9/11 Family Steering Committee, which the Jersey Girls were a part of. They supplied hundreds of well-researched questions for the 9/11 Commission to answer, and they only touched on 30% of their questions. They promised, Thomas Keane promised Patty Casaza to her face that each and every whistleblower would be heard. And in fact, most were ignored and or censored by the 9/11 Commission.
Right, Barry Jennings wasn't allowed to testify, right?
I think Barry Jennings may have been one of them, but Sibel Edmonds, who kind of lost some credibility a couple years ago, not her story regarding 9/11, but her as an individual kind of lost some credibility because she was starting fights with people and just a lot of BS. But the families... Well, let me finish, Sibel Edmonds. The families snuck her into a meeting that the families had with the 9/11 Commission in order for the 9/11 Commission to speak with her. That's the only way that they got her to speak with them. Anthony Schaefer, he never spoke with the 9/11 Commission, I don't think. Or maybe he did. I think he did. But they denied, that's it. He did speak with them, but they denied ever speaking with him about Abel Danger. Right. And I don't know if you follow Tony Schaefer, but oh my God, he is such a right-wing, oh my God. I used to be friends with Tony, and I can't stomach him anymore. Do you remember when Abel Danger first came out, they first blamed the Clinton administration for it? Like, at the time, we weren't allowed to question Bush about 9/11, but when the Abel Danger story came out, all of the Republicans and so forth were questioning Bill Clinton about, that was their tie to Bill Clinton in 9/11. Yeah. But that was allowed, but we weren't allowed to question 9/11 and Bush. But that eventually, because of Kurt Weldon, became a Bush and Clinton issue, the whole Abel Danger thing. But Kurt Weldon was my representative. I'm the one who delivered books having to do with 9/11 to his offices. I was the one that went to one of his town hall meetings and asked him specifically about certain things about 9/11, and I recorded that and put it on my YouTube channel. So yeah, I was intimately familiar with the whole Abel Danger thing, but I lost a lot of respect for Tony over the years.
Yeah, I bought his book, Operation Dark Heart, when it came out. And
right, and it had all the black marks through it.
Money on a book where 90% of it was redacted. Completely blacked out. And I was like, I expected him to be furious and being like, look, I'm going to go forward with the information anyway, but he never really did.
Now, remember I said that it was the cover-up that gets you, it was the the cover-up that gets you, not the crime.
Yeah.
Isn't the the blacking out of this book an indication that there might be a cover-up having to do with 9/11? Just show these pages to people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that show, it's so easy to do to prove that there's a cover-up. It's so easy to do.
I thought so too with the NIST report on World Trade Center 7. I was like, they did a fire safety analysis on a building, and the models look nothing like the collapse. So
Right.
I like that argument personally. I understand why some people get hung up on, and again, when I debated Mick West, I didn't use the controlled demolition evidence at all, because there's so much more stronger evidence and other stronger information and points.
Well, when this came out with their report for WTC7, I wrote an article called "Their Words on Paper."
Yeah.
And basically, I got that expression from Patty Casaza. I'll read you the article if you don't mind.
Yeah.
It was written on August 26, 2008. As 9/11 family member and Jersey girl, Patty Casaza said, quote, "One of the reasons why we still continued to fight for the commission, even as we knew it was a farce, is we wanted their words, their lies down on paper." Actually, I'll just stop there. Years ago, Mike Rupert gave a talk in Portland at the end of November 2001. He gave a talk in Portland, which became an important movie called The Truth and Lies about 9/11. Do you remember that movie? And he talked about, we're not going to talk about controlled demolition. We're not going to talk about whether or not the planes were remote controlled, because these are speculative questions that can talk about for years and never get anywhere. He talked about using their words against them. The best way to fight the media and the politicians is by using their own words and their own documents against them. And that's what Patty Casaza was talking about. They wanted to get their words down on paper, which was the 9/11 report, so that they could show people, where they're lying.
Yeah. And the media just didn't touch it. The media just ignored it when that film dropped, and that was like when I realized that we had to take things into our own hands, and I started becoming a 9/11 activist. That was like back in 2006, maybe 2000, till 2000.
And everything that we're doing now is a direct result of what we did after 9/11. I'm going to talk about Russia, if you don't mind. After 9/11, Bush did away with the anti-ballistic missile treaty that they had with Russia, something that Putin told Bush in July of 2001 was important to maintain. After 9/11, the anti-Russia rhetoric started to grow within the media. They would pick little things here and there that Russia was doing. You would hear Condoleezza Rice call out Russia. In 2004, using 9/11, the NATO scooped up former Soviet states, some of which along the border of Russia, and added them to NATO. In 2008, there was the Russia-Georgia war, and they said that Russia started it, but it turns out that it was Georgia who fired the first shot. And Cheney apparently had something to do with that. You'll notice that we've targeted both Syria and Iran covertly and overtly. We tried to take out Assad blatantly, tried to take out Assad from Syria, both of which are allies of Russia. And then in 2014, we had the coup against the Ukrainian government, which we helped. You remember, what's her name, Victoria Nuland, and John McCain was there as well, directing some of the Nazis that are part of Ukraine to, storm the government. I think they stormed the government. I forget what they did, but that coup had something to do with it. And then the years after that, the Donbass was being bombed. The Donbass region of the Ukraine was being bombed by the pro-Western portion of the Ukraine. And upwards of 14,000 people have been killed, most of which were pro-Russian people, and so Putin felt that he had to come in for that. But, it's a direct result of 9/11. 9/11 was America's Reichstag fire. It really was. It wasn't America's Pearl Harbor, New Pearl Harbor. It was America's Reichstag fire. That's how I look at it. And where we are today is a direct result of all of our actions that we did after 9/11. We completely destabilized the region around Russia. We did so many things to get us to where we are today. We kept pushing Putin's buttons over the last 20 years. And that's how we got to where we are today with Russia and the Ukraine.
Interesting. Why do you think Putin and Russia and media haven't... I've seen a little bit of coverage of 9/11 truth topics and activism on Russia Today when they used to have RT. And then they had Abby Martin on there, of course. But why do you think they haven't, pushed 9/11 truth harder on Russian media?
Russia Today, the TV channel?
Yeah, Russia Today. Or
Actually, when Russia Today first came out and they were covering 9/11 truth-related issues, I was watching them and thinking to myself, all they're doing is exactly what our media should be doing. They weren't coming out with crazy shit. They were promoting the real issues, and this was something that our media should have been doing, but weren't. And I think, Putin probably knew that we were lied to about 9/11 in some way, maybe wanted to get that out there.
Why do you think he's never, made a comment publicly or said anything, himself?
I don't know that he has or hasn't.
I've
I
never
know
heard
that
him say anything. I've looked around. I remember Ahmadinejad of Iran came forward and said that he entertained the theory.
he wrote a letter to George Bush. President Ahmadinejad wrote a letter saying that we know that this was not a simple operation. That intelligence agencies had to be involved in this operation. That didn't get any news coverage on that little letter. Yeah, I don't know. There have been multiple politicians around the world that have questioned 9/11. One of them,
Benazir Bhutto.
Benazir Bhutto?
Benazir Bhutto, yeah.
She was assassinated. They first blamed that on Al-Qaeda?
Yeah.
Both Musharraf and the USA blamed that on Al-Qaeda. And do you know who ended up guilty in a court of law for the murder of Benazir Bhutto? President Musharraf.
President Musharraf?
Was found guilty of murdering Benazir Bhutto in a court of law. I have an entire archive of that entire experience. But another politician that spoke out was somebody from the UK, Michael Meacher. Have you ever heard that name? He was very big on the ISI aspect of 9/11. He wrote an article for The Guardian, I think. And I had correspondence with him. And he actually wrote to me. And I'm used to American politicians writing form letters to people in response. Whenever you write them, they send you a form letter. He actually wrote me and talked to me. And I have it, and I put it on my website, to archive it, the conversation. He was somebody who spoke out about 9/11. He was a member of parliament. Andreas von Bülow, I think, was the defense minister of Germany at one time. He
Yep.
spoke out about 9/11, and in fact, he said that DARPA created a system to take over a hijacked plane, take over a plane remotely in the event of a hijacking. That's one thing we could talk about.
Yeah.
All of the hijackings that took place during the 60s, 70s, 80s, and so forth, there were so many of them. And to think that our government didn't plan for every contingency having to do with hijackings is absurd.
Yeah,
You know,
Dawson Field. I remember the Dawson Field hijacking.
Dawson's Field.
Five airlines hijacked simultaneously. They threatened
Exactly.
crashing the buildings.
Exactly. That happened in early September or 70, 72.
September 11th, 1979.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was basically another 9/11 type event. That's why when people say they could never have flown those planes, they could never have done, you know, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, look at Dawson's Field. They could. People can do what was done, essentially, on 9/11.
So that AWACS FTS, the flight termination systems, basically they have these hijack systems that could, anti-hijacking systems installed on the planes that they could lock out the cockpit controls and fly the airplanes from the ground as a countermeasure to if terrorists ever hijack the plane, they could just take control of it. But in the wrong hands, you don't even need terrorists to fly, to take control.
Exactly.
And fly.
But see, I
that was
I
never
don't talk.
investigated.
I don't really talk about whether or not there were hijackers. I believe that there were.
Oh, I believe there
At
were.
least
I
at
don't
a
think they flew the
patsy level.
planes.
I'm sorry?
With the flight path of 77 into the Pentagon, that corkscrew maneuver, the way the pilots have said about that, and also the last 12 seconds of UA-175 as it approached the towers, you can see it only made a single corrective maneuver. A human pilot would have made several corrective maneuvers as he's flying the plane, but a computer program would have only made a single maneuver, and that's what was observed.
Are you familiar with the individual Luai Sakra?
No.
Safra? Sakra. Look up Luaisakra if you want. Paul Thompson, the creator of the complete 9/11 timeline, was quoted, I think it was by the Sunday Times of London. Luai Sakra said that he trained some of the 9/11 hijackers, and he said that Hani Hanjour was not actually the pilot of Flight 77, that it was, I can't remember the name of the hijacker, who was more adept at flying than Hani Hanjour was. And he said that he was the actual pilot that flew Flight 77. And I know that there are many pilots that pilots for 9/11 Truth have talked to who said it was an impossible flight maneuver and stuff like that. And it may very well
The
have been.
NTSB data doesn't match the flight, the record or the flight path or certain things too. There's other errors.
Well, who found that out?
There's a number of people that have looked into it. I know that Aidan Monahan has a book on this,
Right.
where he actually got all this data declassified. It's called 9/11 Declassified.
Right, I'm familiar with Aiden. He and I have had our disagreements over the years, but whatever.
Yeah. There's a lot of disagreement within this, and it feels like they're trying to drive a wedge into every issue as much as possible.
Well, did you know after 9/11, John Ashcroft reinstated COINTELPRO?
Really?
Yeah. My goodness. Hold on. 1 second.
COINTELPRO. Wait, that's the FBI spying program that was uncovered by the Citizens Committee to investigate the FBI. They broke into the FBI office on the night of the George Foreman fight with Muhammad Ali, and they stole those documents from FBI archives and published them illegally.
All right, here.
We wouldn't even know about COINTELPRO if it weren't for people burglarizing the FBI and and leaking those documents. You know that, right?
Right. I have a number of news articles talking about John Ashcroft. Quote, as noted here, Ashcroft has revived the FBI's totally discredited COINTEL program, which flourished from 1956 to 1971 during the anti-war and civil rights movements. In those years, the Bureau monitored, infiltrated, and disrupted an array of his religious and political organizations that were critical of various government policies. Another article, quote, from now on, covert FBI agents can mingle with unsuspecting Americans at churches, mosques, synagogues, meetings of environmentalists, the ACLU, the Gun Owners of America, and Reverend Al Sharpton's presidential campaign headquarters. These eavesdroppers do not need any evidence, not even a precious complaint that anything illegal is going on or is being contemplated. Another news article, quote, Ashcroft has restored the reckless spirit of COINTELPRO by again giving the FBI the power to conduct investigations under such loose guidelines that the Fourth Amendment might as well be obsolete. I have like 3 more news articles that talk about how he reinstated COINTELPRO. And that was from all mainstream articles.
So this also reminds me of remember Cass Sunstein? He advocated
right.
cognitive infiltration.
When he wrote that and said that we needed to be infiltrated, I'm like, where the hell have you been, dude? We've been infiltrated for years.
Yeah.
There were obvious campaigns that were there to discredit us.
Right.
Like holograms and
the big one that came out after Cass Sunstein, though, I didn't really notice before, was the whole Judy Wood and the space laser that melted the World Trade Center theory.
There was a guy who debated her.
Yeah, that guy's name was...
made her look like a fool.
Yeah, the only scientist that ever did that.
Greg Jenkins. Was it Greg Jenkins?
Yeah.
He debated her, made her look like an absolute fool. I don't know how anybody could watch that and think to themselves, "Oh my God, Judy Wood is somebody I need to listen to and promote."
Right, and you see all these fake sock accounts promoting her and her wild
Yeah.
movies.
When you see shit like that,
like
you know.
every single thread, every time I post 9/11, these people just show up out of the woodwork to be like, "Oh, read what happened to the towers and where did the towers go?" You know?
Right. Beams from space brought them down. Space beams.
Right. And she authored that first paper with on the space blazer with Morgan Reynolds.
Oh God.
You can look up the paper. Yeah, that was their first paper together was on the theory that a space-based weapon.
You know, and Morgan Reynolds is another person that managed to get on national television.
Yeah,
to talk about his bullshit. TV fakery. The planes were actually cartoons. You know, whatever he said.
9/11 was done in Mickey Mouse Studios.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the American public doesn't know any better if they don't know the information, and it's sad because they're not being given the whole the truth. We got about 5 minutes left before this thing recording wraps up, so let's anything you want to share, any plugs, any important information?
Well, obviously, be supportive of the 9/11 family members who are involved in the Saudi lawsuit. That's something that people don't understand. The government does not want 9/11 in a court of law. Every time 9/11 has made it into a court of law, we found out a number of things, like during the Moussaoui sentencing phase. They were coaching witnesses. You know, there was so much shenanigans going on. So anytime 9/11 is in a court of law, you should be supportive of that, so long as it's a credible case. So be supportive of the family members. Do your best to try and keep it simple. Keep it simple. Just tell the story. You know, George Bush and Dick Cheney went to Tom Daschle's office, asked him not to investigate the 9/11 attacks, or just go up to somebody on the street and ask them, do you think we were lied to about 9/11? That's what I do. I go up to people and I say, do you think we were lied to about 9/11, acting as if I was somebody who wasn't really knowledgeable? And then almost 100% of the time, people always say yes. Um, you know, I'd say to start
It's better to
committing
ask
act.
questions and say that you don't know than it is to, profess, hey, we know this and
Exactly.
I have all the answers and I'm an expert, because I've done 20 years of investigation almost into this now, and when I talk to people about it, it's frustrating. It gets frustrating because you don't have the knowledge that I do. You didn't spend the hours
Right.
doing that research. So I have to remind myself, like, how do I approach people that don't know, and how do I bring the people that are just against this over to the right side? And that's not been easy.
If I didn't break my back, I don't know if you know this, I broke my back on May 22nd, 2013. Prior to that, I was part of, I worked with Cindy Sheehan for 8 years. She was the face of the peace movement, and I was somebody from the 9/11 Truth movement, building bridges with the anti-war movement, which I thought was important to do because they go hand in hand. So Cindy and I worked together for 8 years, and we started an organization called Peace of the Action, PEACE of the Action, and we were calling for people to commit acts of civil disobedience. And that's what I was doing prior to breaking my back, was committing acts of civil disobedience, and I would have continued to do that. Unfortunately, I broke my back. So I would love to see people, committing acts of civil disobedience in the name of 9/11 justice.
Yeah, I don't see how we can have courthouses that prosecute people, and when they don't prosecute not Dick Cheney for shooting someone in the face, they don't you have police that will arrest us and bring you to jail, but they won't arrest these politicians. They won't arrest the people who.
No, our system, we live in a fascist government. We literally live in a fascist nation. We all live in a fascist nation. I think that was a Rage Against the Machine statement, but it's true. Fascism was created by Mussolini, I think, and Hitler learned from Mussolini about fascism and implemented it. What would you call the equivalent of the brown shirts today? I would say like the Proud Boys might be the equivalent of brown shirts.
Yeah, those Proud Boys, definitely like remind me of the brown shirts, right?
I can't understand why there isn't an anti-war movement right now out in the streets. There are people protesting for Palestine, but what about the rest of the wars that we're still involved with? There hasn't been a time since 9/11 where we haven't been bombing some country somewhere. Literally. We're still bombing Syria, I think.
Yeah, how many wars were started off 9/11? Like,
Too many. Well, there's a map. There's a map on the Smithsonian Institute's website that shows militarily we've been operating in 80 different countries since because of 9/11.
wow. Yeah, and Iran just positioned their country so close as to all of our military bases. They just must want war.
Right.
So. Yeah, it's. Thank you for taking the time today with me, John. It was a pleasure having you, and I know you're a
Thank you, Jeremy.
A controversial figure, and this is a controversial topic. So, I appreciate everyone who stayed in it for this long and got to the end. So, thank you all for watching, and let me know how you like this in the comments below, and if you'd like to see Jon Gold on other podcasts, please reach out to them and forward this and share this around. So thank you.
Also, my book, which is available for free at www.wewereliedtoabout911.com. You can get my second book for free, which tells you how to get my first book for free. So both my books are available for free.
Awesome. That's great. Well, I encourage people who read and enjoy literature to dive into those. And also check out Jon Gold's YouTube channel. I'll post a link in the description below so that people can check out his awesome archive of footage from 9/11. And the C-SPAN clips are just great, man. It's a dive down the rabbit hole that this generation just has never seen. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you.